In my previous video, I improvised a simple table saw and used that to cut all the rectangular parts for the depth adjustment mechanism. Now I just have to cut all the curved bits. So I've just sanded where all the glue joints are going to go, because with old wood like that you get much better bonding if it's a freshly sanded surface. And this whole thing goes together like this. This goes in here, and then this here, and this in here. The saw's going to fit in here. There's going to be hinges here, and this thing will be the depth adjustment, like so. Luckily my cuts are all square, otherwise I'd be going, oh shit. To make sure I drill the pilot hole square, I've got this block with a notch on it, and it'll also serve as a depth stop. Now to assemble this, I'm going to assemble it first with just glue and just a few pieces at a time. That's tilted out a little bit here. And now I'm going to use this bigger piece of wood to force that joint into square. Now time to go play with the computer while the glue dries on that. Now as I glue this part on, a really important alignment is that this here is square with this plane here. If it isn't, any future alignment is going to be much more difficult. Again, it's important to sand the old surface so that I get a good glue bond. With the glue now fully dried, I'm adding the screws. The hinges for the depth adjustment mount on here, and to get a better hold for them, they're going to screw into plywood which glues onto the particle board. And I designed this with regular door hinges like this one, but I have this pair of old hinges, so I'm going to use these instead because I got those for free. I just realized something that's kind of important. With both of these resting flat on the table like this, well, most of the time the saw is going to be used at not full depth, which means sawdust can accumulate on these surfaces here because that's actually facing up. And then when you want to use the saw at full depth, this really gets wedged in there, and it might even try to pull this off of here. So the solution is to put a spacer in here to leave a little bit of room for the sawdust, and I've just re-drilled all my pilot holes for this new position. And I realized for the same reason I needed a gap right here, so I just moved the hinges this way a little bit. So the saw is going to fit into this bracket like so, but I need to strip off all the extra bits before I can use it. If you don't have a ring removal tool like this, I'd recommend taking that ring off with an angle grinder because you won't be using the saw for anything else afterwards anyways. I'm making dismantling this saw look easier than it is, but if you're willing to use an angle grinder, it's much faster. The saw motor fits in here like so, or at least it's supposed to. Problem is, I did not model this power cord in the CAD program, and so I didn't make allowances for it, so I have to drill a hole right about here for this cord. I'm drilling the hole from both sides to avoid tear out on the back. Well, I just had to remove this piece here to make this hole a little bit bigger because it wasn't in quite the right place. And I've been fitting the saw and whittling away at it. It needs to go in here. And this saw has to be parallel to this plane. Right now, it's still tilted a little bit this way. And so I've gradually been whittling away at some of the things here. So here I need to cut away a little bit more to make room for the saw. More still. I've now got it parallel in this direction, and in this direction it also needs to be parallel. I'm just using that square. I'm still tilted this way a little bit, but I have leeway here, so I should be able to adjust that into coplanar. The blade needs to be coplanar with this surface here. When I built my last saw, I tried to not destroy the saw too much by mounting it on various parts of the plastic and this hole here, but I think just screwing it to the guard is much easier and it's a much better mounting method. But that means I have to drill some extra holes. I've drilled the holes on the front bigger so I could get in there with a screwdriver and a screw. On my previous homemade table saw, I had quite a bit of sawdust that got deposited here. And I think what happened is, with the blade in here, eventually this got plugged up, but I didn't notice. And so the sawdust all came around here, hits the top of the table, some of it goes this way and some of it this way, ending up getting sucked into here. So to prevent that, I'm going to cut a big hole in the guard right about here. With the saw positioned so that it's parallel to this piece of plywood here, I've actually got quite a bit of space between the guard and the plywood. So I need some spacers, and I might as well glue these to the plywood itself, so that way when I screw it on here, the screw is actually going to have more support. I want to use some 8 by 1 1/4 inch screws, and I think this drill will make the right size pilot hole to get a good firm hold. With the ruler on here, I can see it's a bit too close on here, so I need a little bit of shim in here. And to prevent from losing them, I'm just going to glue the shims in place. I have to make sure the blade mount is going to be perpendicular to this edge, so let's check that with a square. And that looks like it's close enough already. So I got this clamped on here now, and this is how the depth adjustment will work. My depth of cut is limited because the motor hits the particle board, so I'm going to cut out a cavity right here to get a little bit more. The best way to cut this cavity is with a router, but to keep the tools to a minimum, I'm going to cut this with a circular saw. Wow, that actually worked much better than I thought it would. Now, just to make sure this bolt hole stays aligned with the slot as I move through the depth. That's good. Now I'm finally ready to glue on the mount. It's really important that both of these hinges are exactly the same distance from the edge of the wood. This part goes on here, and I've already glued and screwed this block on. And now I need to figure out where to put the pilot holes for this to fit on here, and I'm just going to do that by tapping the screws. The purpose of this piece of wood is just to help hold the particle board flat, and I'm only going to attach it with glue. I still need to make a proper fence and add miter slots, and I'll cover that in upcoming videos.